You're listening to Virginia Trioli on ABC Radio Melbourne.
The two judges that these opposition MPs are being suggested as having misrepresented are former Chief Justice Robert French and former Judge Kenneth Hayne, who are both prominent supporters of The Voice. Now, I've got their observations that they did actually make during their time, and particularly when they gave evidence to the parliamentary inquiry originally. I've got their quotes in front of me. So let's talk to Keith Wallahan and see whether, in their dissenting report, in trying to make out the argument that aspects of The Voice would actually be deleterious or somehow get in the way or impede the proper function of elected representatives, whether they've crossed the line or not. Keith Wallahan, member for Menzies, always good to talk to you. Good morning.
You too, Virginia. Thank you for having me.
So I can go through at length exactly what it is that Robert French and Kenneth Hayne had to say. But what do you say that they have argued in terms of impeding the functioning of government if we do end up having an Indigenous voice to Parliament?
Oh, thank you, Virginia. I read that story and it's absolute nonsense. That report accurately reflected the evidence of Mr. Hayne and Mr. French. And it's articulated in this way. When we look at constitutional risk must be assessed for both severity and likelihood. Mr. Hayne and Mr. French accepted the first, that it's severe, but then they sought to downplay the second on likelihood. So they both argued that the High Court would not find that the executive was under an implied duty to consult The Voice, because to do so would, according to them, make government unworkable or would bring government to a halt. They said that. Now, neither Mr. French nor Mr. Hayne can claim with certainty that the High Court would accept their arguments. And that's why our report said that no lawyer, no matter their status or how distinguished their career, can seriously guarantee which arguments the High Court will accept in the future. So the upshot was this. We agree with them on severity, but we don't agree on their assessment of likelihood, and no one misrepresented them.
Well, no one can ever anticipate. I mean, you'd have to have a crystal ball. You'd have to get inside the mind of a future judge, High Court judge. No one can really speak to anticipate exactly what a High Court would find, but you can certainly accurately or inaccurately reflect whether those two judges are supporters of The Voice or not in their capacity as having great understanding of the Australian Constitution. And they do have that understanding, Keith Wallahan, and they are supporters of The Voice and its functioning with executive government. So putting it all together, haven't you misrepresented them?
Not at all. So if the standard that's being put for misrepresenting someone on your show, in every newspaper, no one could ever quote anyone without publishing the full entire speech or the full entire article. That's not how the media works. That's not how Parliament works. That's
a little cute. There's a responsibility on everyone in your summary, or no matter how briefly you appear here, to generally represent what their large conclusion is.
Not at all. So the separation between severity and likelihood is a real thing, and all parliamentarians, and the report makes very clear that they made a view clear on severity, but sought to use that to reinforce their view on likelihood. That's made express in the dissenting report. And not only is it made express, but then it's referenced to the Hansard, which has the full quote that they have. So there's no misrepresentation at all here.
Let's go back to basics. Maybe this might be the most useful way of doing it, because I could read out, I've got it here in front of me, for example, Justice French's and Justice Haynes' observations, but they're, of course, written in that very long-winded legalese, which doesn't lend itself very easily to being read out and understood on radio. But let's say this. You and I guess maybe a quick fire round might solve it. You acknowledge that both those former judges are supporters of The Voice, yes?
Yes, I do. Yes,
okay. And in their evidence before the committee, the substantive conclusion they drew was that it would not be problematic for the daily functioning of government in order for us to have a voice. Is that a correct conclusion as well?
Yes, so their view is that if those two duties, to consult or consider, and they're very complex duties that are found in administrative law, if they are found here, then their view is that is a severe outcome for governance in Australia. And they said because of that, a future High Court would therefore be unlikely to find those implications. that was the way it was articulated by them.
I'm trying to say it in more simple language, which is that they don't. Their ultimate conclusion is that these judges, these constitutional law judges, don't have a problem with the requirement to consult, as it seems to be suggested and implied by the existence of a voice.
They don't have a problem, but they are guessing. So even
I think the moment you start talking those terms, aren't you now moving into your sort of interpretation of what you think they're doing?
I'm going to give you a quote from Chief Justice French. So he said, when he talked, I asked him about this exact issue. I said, can we talk about predicting a future High Court, how they will operate? And I'm quoting him here. He said that involves evaluative judgments upon which reasonable minds can differ. And there has been many High Court cases in which former Justices Hayne and French, where I'm sure were very confident of their opinions, but were in the minority in a 4-3 decision. That's how the High Court works. And Justice French, he made an obvious but simple point that, of course, they can't predict what a future High Court will do here. But they can still give their best guess, and it's an educated one, and it probably carries significant weight with people, but it's not absolute. And our point in the speeches and in the reports is that a severe consequence, even on a low likelihood, means it's a risk you must take seriously. It's why, Virginia, we take aircraft maintenance more serious than fixing our bike, because the consequences of failure are so catastrophic. We take low risk very seriously. And both limbs of risk should be assessed, and that's what the speeches did.
You're still comfortable, Keith Wallahan, with the dissenting view from that parliamentary inquiry? You still think that a voice to Parliament would be a dangerous thing for Australia, and you'd want Australians to vote no?
I'm not going to tell Australians what to vote. That's their decision. I get one vote, they get one vote. The dissenting report identified risk. Even on the expert evidence from the government, I acknowledge that they said the risk is low. But the point in the dissenting report is that because the severity is so high, I think we should take that low assessment of likelihood seriously. There were 4 options put to amend the words. They haven't been taken in the House, so we'll see what happens in the Senate. But that's why I think on constitutional risk, because this is permanent, because it's in our Constitution, that should be something we take seriously.
Good to talk to you, Keith Wallahan. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Virginia.
Keith Wallahan, there, member for